Hey everyone, it's Kong again with another episode of Should You Summon? As always, I'm going to be presenting high-level overviews using these 4 criteria to help you decide whether this banner is worth your hard-earned vouchers and crystals. How these characters fit into your team, whether they unlock any bonds, what kind of content they get used for, and their future availability. So, let's dive into this Destiny banner featuring Bozel, Liana, and Luna, running from August 20th to September 2nd. This is not the first time this banner has been offered, and this is one of those classic, essential character banners that's going to keep coming back every once in a while. As a Destiny banner, your first SSR is guaranteed to be one of these 3 characters that you don't already have. After you pull your first SSR unit, or if you already have all 3 of these characters, then it's essentially a normal raid-up banner where you can get off-banner heroes. So first let's talk about Bozel. The Prince of Darkness is an AoE blanket debuff specialist. He's an all-round super useful character for both PvE and PvP content. You want debuffs? He has debuffs. Actually, speaking of which, he has a new piece of unique armor coming out in January on global servers, and this inflicts an additional random debuff on enemies that you damage. It also has plus 10% magic defense, so it's instantly going to be his best in slot when it comes out. He's a member of Dark Reincarnation, buffed by Bozel and Licorice, and Mythical Realm, buffed by Gizaroth and the Tree Sage. So he does carry his own buff for the Dark faction, and until recently he was actually their sole buffer. His buff gives you a 15% damage boost against enemies with more than 3 debuffs. For bonds, he unlocks the defensive bonds for Pharakia and Ares, and the attack bonds for Bernhardt, Egbert, and Licorice. And for his own bonds, he needs Egbert for his defensive bond and Pharakia for his attack bond, although the latter isn't a super high priority since he generously deals damage based on his magic defense. Still, those are both super common, easy to get characters, so you don't have to worry about his bonds being locked out. For content, he's on faction for Fenrir in Ancient Beckoning, and he's an essential piece of the puzzle in that fight, contributing lots of debuffs and also cycling huge damage with his AoE spells. He's also very useful for Leviar in Eternal Temple, with his magical attacks and his access to a sneaky summon to soak up the boss's gimmick debuff. As always, he's also a helpful helper against that pesky ice dragon. And of course we can't forget the eternal utility of AoE bomb strategies for content like Timeless Trials and various random challenges. He's also a common meta pick for Apex Arena for a few reasons. He carries a Dark Faction buff, and he's good for blanketing opponents with debuffs. He can also get some good use out of sleep in certain situations. Bozel can become surprisingly bulky and difficult to erase, especially if you have an extra Swordsmith's medal lying around and you've built up your Crystal Warlocks. For availability, this exact same Destiny banner should be coming back again in early January. Okay, now let's move on to Liana. Liana is one of Langrisser's OP game-changing healers, probably one of the most useful overall characters in the game. In addition to being a great straight-up healer, she also has passive healing and debuff removal. She also has access to Gospel, a summon, and she's the only character in the game with Act Again, which lets the target unit act again. She's a member of Protagonists, buffed by Matthew, Legion of Glory, buffed by Ledin, Elwyn, and Grenier, and Princess Alliance, buffed by Shelfaniel and Luna. For bonds, she unlocks the attack bonds for Scott, Elwyn, and young Jessica, and for her own bonds, she needs Hind for her defensive bond, and then Elwyn for her attack bond. For content, Liana is useful for pretty much everything. In PvE, she does what a healer needs to do, keeping your whole team healthy. She can also use Act Again to help big DPS units erase 2 enemies immediately, which is especially useful for units that can move again after attacking, like Leon. She also has access to a summon, which can be useful for Leviar to draw debuffs, or for any strategies that involve kiting or baiting enemies around. She's also a meta pick for Phoenix in Eternal Temple, and Needhog and Hugin and Munin in Ancient Beckoning. In PvP, every box needs a handful of healers, and she's still one of the best. In addition to the threat of Act Again, she also has Gospel, which can essentially make up for missing faction buff, or protect your key units from a plethora of nasty effects that you don't want to deal with. And finally, let's talk about Luna. Luna is one of the most versatile units in the game. She can move again before or after attacking, giving her a huge effective range. Her 3-cost skill creates an aura that allows any non-flying ally that passes close to her to move an additional 2 tiles unhindered by terrain. She also has a magic defense boosting aura in her talent that can make the rest of your team surprisingly resilient against magical threats. She's a member of Origins of Light, buffed by Dehart, Jugler, and Freya, Princess Alliance, buffed by Shelfaniel and Luna, and Strategic Masters, buffed by Altamuller and Lanford. So she does carry her own faction buff for Princess Alliance. This one's interesting. It causes you to inflict an additional fixed damage burst after attacking, equal to 15% of the enemy's remaining hit points. For bonds, Luna unlocks the defensive bond for Claret and the attack bond for Lewin. And for her own bonds, she needs Lewin for her defensive bond and Dehart for her attack bond. Again, the attack bond is not a super high priority on her since she attacks based on her magic defense, but unlike some other conversion characters, extra skill is actually pretty handy for Luna if you want her to deal criticals. For content, in PvE she is a reliable DPS in pretty much any PvE content. She's great against the Dark Dragon. She can be used against the Ice Dragon in her Archer class, but she's not necessarily ideal there. She's great against Leviar, she's also on faction for Phoenix and Valkyrie, and she's also a very useful meta pick in the fights against Jormungandr, Nidhogg, and Sleipnir in Ancient Beckoning. Her mobility and her magic defense aura and her solid attack makes her just generally very useful. She's also a common threat in Apex Arena, especially with her 3-cost skill to boost mobility for your whole team, making her a must in most rush boxes. Although her days as a reliable DPS seem to be long behind her, she's still a fixture because of her overall utility and support. That magic defense aura, that mobility boost. Throw a King's Crown on her and she can actually buff up a unit's attack power. She can be made quite bulky as well, which can make it tough for opponents who rely on magical damage to get rid of her. Again, for availability, this same Destiny banner should be coming back in early January. Now, having talked about all 3 characters already, what this essentially means is if you don't have all 3 of these characters, or if you're missing more than one, you can use this Destiny guarantee to get one of the characters now, and then narrow it down to another guaranteed Destiny pick later on in January. If you're missing all 3, then it actually might not be a bad idea to try to summon for 2 now and then leave that guaranteed pick for later. Okay, so here's the quick and dirty. We have Bozel, who's a top tier unit for a wide variety of PvE and PvP content. He has the faction buff for Dark Reincarnation, and he unlocks the defensive bond for Farakia and Ares, and the attack bonds for Bernhardt, Egbert, and Licorice. Then we have Liana, who's a top-tier healer and one of the most overall useful heroes. She has access to Act Again, Gospel, and Big Heals, and she unlocks the attack bonds for Scott, Elwyn, and Young Jessica. And finally we have Luna, who's a top-tier versatile hero for a wide variety of PvE and PvP content. She has a faction buff for Princess Alliance, and she unlocks the defensive bond for Claret and the attack bond for Lewin. In case it's not obvious with all the top tiers being thrown around here, I highly recommend to summon on this banner unless you already have all 3 of these characters. If you're missing 1, 2, or all 3 of them, then you definitely want to pick someone off with your Destiny guarantee. And now for the usual reminder about upcoming banners. So next week, it'll finally be time for the crossover everyone's been hyping since Ares was released. The Legend of Heroes Trails of Cold Steel banner features 2 huge PvP threats in Arianrod and Reen. Reen appeared in virtually every box in the Chinese Season 5 playoffs, and Arianrod was also the 15th most common unit in playoff boxes. If you PvP at all, or even plan to in the future, you're definitely going to want to prioritize summoning one or both of these monsters. Now, when this banner goes away, it should be replaced by a banner featuring Yulia and Maya. So if you had bad luck on the Ares and Maya debut banner and you still need to unlock Ares bonds, then this may be your chance. So I know you're still saving up for next week, but let me know in the comments if you're tossing out a few summons for one of these essential units. Were you missing anyone going into this banner? My Bozel and Luna are both still sitting at 5 stars despite using them all the time. So since this banner overlaps with the crossover, I'll probably wait and see how I do on Reen's banner before nipping back over here to hopefully snipe some cheap shards. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you again in the next Should You Summon.